This podcast was brought to you by Meros cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilises the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to State of the Project Meros. This is the May 2020 update with me, your host Cryptosi, and I am joined as ever by the enigmatic Kayaba. Kayaba, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, thanks for asking. It's just been an interesting month, so I'm excited to get this podcast done.
Awesome. For those of you who do not know about State of the Project Meros, this is basically a podcast we have every single month where we go over the happenings, the developments, and all the things that have been going on with the Meros project. Meros is a brand new cryptocurrency, which it does currency very well. Well, it will do once it's completed. I'm sure Kayaba will tell you. We use GitHub and we use it's a periodic, let's say, publication which is published to Medium to gather our information. If you're interested in Meros, please join the Discord. I will put the link in the description, but I do not want to ramble on for too long. I want to get straight into it because there has been some worry around the Meros project, Kayaba. I have to ask you, the GitHub seems quite quiet this month. The Medium update, I don't think there has been one during the month of April. Everybody's talking about it on the streets, on the beaches, on the boats, in the planes. They're all asking, is Meros dead?
Well, the answer to that is just a simple, of course not. For the past month or so, I've actually been working on moving. So because of that, I've had to suspend work just to focus. I'm trying to get this move done as soon as possible. I've lived in my current place for the last 6 years, and it has a lot of years of my life. So it's just a lot of work while I move. And because of that, I've had to temporarily put down Meros, and that's caused it to slow down. Our last Medium update was just over a month ago, and generally I try to do those every 3 weeks. They were originally weekly, then bi-weekly, then monthly, then tri-weekly. Had a couple at every 5 weeks, and then I'm just like, I'm not going to set a timer on these. The timing's always so regular, they're just going to come out when they come out. So it's been just over a month since our last one, and there hasn't really been anything to write about. So because of that, I've just been posting Discord announcements, just quick summaries of where things are at, because there's nothing to warrant a full-on blog post right now.
Yes, there was recently a Discord announcement. Some of the parts from that announcement we are going to go over in this podcast. I've got a few of them actually written down. But for anybody who is really interested, please, 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 don't be shy. Just join the Discord. It's a friendly community. It's, as the project is so new, I haven't noticed as yet any of the kind of the tribalism that you do get in other parts of cryptocurrency where ours is better than yours and all that kind of jazz. It is very, very interesting. If you're not even that tech savvy, also please join. You will be welcome. And as Kayaba said, there are announcements there. When we make podcasts, the information will be there, and when there are Medium updates, it will be there as well. So the first question I wanted to ask you was about an issue, actually, straight from the GitHub. And the issue is number 164, which was branded critical, which always piques my interest. And the issue was labeled that malicious miners can cause chain flickering. Now, I have no idea what chain flickering is. So could you please explain that issue, what it is and how you intend to solve it?
So recently we added chain rewards, which is a feature we've needed for a while, but due to its complexity, it took us a while to get around to. It actually took a month to implement on its own, especially with all the testing we needed to verify it. So chain reorgs are defined in 3 steps. One, we detect a longer chain, or not longer. With cryptocurrency, it's not about how long the chain is, it's about which one has more work behind it. So we detect a better chain we revert to the last common point, and then we sync up the new chain. The problem here is a concept called chain flickering. You can get Meros to detect a longer chain, revert back, and try to switch over. Fail to switch over, which means it has to sync back to the old chain, and then you can inform, hey, I have this longer chain again. And it will revert, try to sync it, fail. And basically, you can take up the node's time and energy just trying to sync this new chain infinitely and failing. And while these nodes are in this state of reverting, syncing, it can disrupt mining because the node won't be able to say, here's what you should mine off of because we'll be constantly flickering. So because of that, it does represent an attack on the proof of work.
Does sound like quite a serious attack, actually, now that you've explained it. Chain flickering, for people who are quite blockchain savvy, I didn't know it was that. I didn't know that was the term for it, but that does sound like quite a serious attack.
I'm not really sure there is a term for it. I just need to say it's switching between the two at a very fast rate.
Right.
Thankfully, it should only take a couple days to fix. I think, honestly, most of the time after writing the initial fix is going to be properly testing it, because we'll need some tests in NIM. Meros is written in NIM, and we use NIM to test segments of the code base. Yet we also have Python tests, which test the node as a whole. So we'll need a few of each, actually, just to verify it's proper and we're not creating new bugs or making the existing bug worse.
I've got two follow-on questions from that. First of all, how expensive, how resource-intensive do you think it would be for somebody to have launched an attack like that? Would it have been something that could have been done for a couple of dollars on a pretty low-powered VPS maybe? Or would it have been something that would have been quite difficult to actually pull off?
You would have to successfully mine a single block. And instead of mining a valid block, you would have to mine a block designed to be invalid. And then once you mine that invalid block, and you cause all the nodes to start flickering, then you would have to use mining power to get a series of valid blocks after that. The thing is that you can only get up to 5 blocks at a time due to the way we checkpoint blocks. And after you do those 5 blocks, you would then have to mine another invalid block before anyone else mines a valid block, cause the flickering again, and then mine the next series of 6. So there are safeguards here, and really the solution is just to stop chain flickering, of course, but it would require enough mining power to mine a block before anyone else mined a block.
Okay, and how did you come across this issue? These types of things are quite a random thing to find out. How did you come across it? Did it just happen to one of the nodes as you was running the testnet, or did you just consider it as you was writing the code?
So I was actually looking over the chain reorganization code, and that's just when I noticed if it fails to sync a chain, it doesn't blacklist the chain. It doesn't say, don't try this chain again. It just continues on and reverts back.
Thank you for that, Kayaba. I'm going to move on to the next question. I guess we kind of touched on it. Developer testnet 4S. Where do we stand with this current testnet? Is the S still valid? Is the developer testnet still stable? Have you finished with it? Where are we with developer testnet 4S?
So last time we talked, we did developer testnet 4, but unfortunately after a day or so, the nodes were shutting down due to an error. And that was issue number 141, which I believe we've already talked about. So recently we decided to do developer testnet 4S, where the S stands for stable. And with developer testnet 4S, we compiled a list of networking bugs that were causing errors and therefore stopping nets from being able to stay up over time. And with those collection of issues decided, we worked on solving them. And now at this time, we've solved enough of them. We're happy to release a stable version of DT4.
Okay. And how long did you run the developer testnet 4S for?
We have yet to do 4S. We did 4 and then decided to do 4S. And we're planning to do 4S within the next few days. In fact, by the time this podcast is released, it may have already been done. Or it may already have been started. I'm trying to run this next one for a little bit longer than usual. But developer testnet 4, I think, only lasted a couple of days before we decided to call it.
Yeah. I believe last episode was I think we recorded the April update just after we turned off, you had turned off developer testnet 4. I think it was just after that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to commit number 168, which it looked really interesting to me, mostly because I have no idea of what it means. Right? So it was to replace AsyncNet with Kronos. I like Kronos because it does sound like a bad guy from a Marvel movie. So what does this actually mean, commit number 168? What is it about, and what does it add or change in the Meros network?
So AsyncNet is NIM's standard library for networking. There's a bit of programming called asynchronous, which basically means if you're waiting for something, like you're waiting for a socket to send, or a network connection to send data over, you can call this thing called await. That's what it's generally called in most languages. And while you're waiting for this network connection to return data, you can run other processes at the same time. You don't have to wait for that network connection to return data, and that doesn't block everything. You are allowed to do other things at the same time, which is very useful. So asynchronous net is the NIM standard library for networking that doesn't hold up your node and cause it to wait minutes on a random connection. And recently, I've been a bit frustrated with it, so I've moved over to Kronos, it was actually originally a fork of the asynchronous standard library from NIM. And they've really focused on networking and provided a lot of strong functionality with it. So I'm very happy to have moved over.
Okay, we have spoken about NIM quite a lot in other podcasts, in other previous episodes. What you're saying now about this replacing AsyncNet with Kronos, it does beg the question about NIM. And I know I've asked you this before, but this was maybe about 6 or so episodes ago. But how do you feel about NIM and how they're progressing with regards to building a cryptocurrency on such a, I could say such a young language? How do you feel about how they're progressing, and what other steps are you taking apart from like this one you just literally just mentioned about moving from AsyncNet to Kronos? What other steps are you taking to protect Meros from a slowing down in NIM's development? So, for example, do you worry about NIM at some point becoming not an abandoned language, but yeah, perhaps an abandoned language? And if that does happen, what would that mean for Meros? How would you handle such a situation?
So while NIM is comparatively young, it is not a young language by any means. To speak candidly, I've been frustrated with NIM in the past. NIM has a lot of great features, and I love the language itself. That said, the NIM compiler, the thing that actually takes the NIM language and produces a runnable app out of it, it has a lot of bugs. And recently, they released their 1.0 release after, I think, a decade of development. They finally created their 1.0 release. Unfortunately, they did not fix enough of the compiler bugs where I was really happy with that 1.0 label. And generally, when you release a 1.0, you do what's called a compatibility freeze. So if you go from 1.0 to 1.1, your code is guaranteed to work the exact same way. It might be slightly faster, but it won't break. It won't change in functionality. It will still compile. It will still produce an app, and that app will work as intended. But NIM is not producing those guarantees. So really the 1.0 label is nothing more than a label. And that's something I've been irritated with. That said, I don't see NIM as being abandoned. There's a lot of groups using it. There's other groups using it for blockchains. Status, who's actually the group behind Kronos, specifically status.io, they've been using it for their work on Ethereum. And even Komodo was experimenting with NIM at one point.
Interesting. So, and I think this is one of the beauties of open source software. So what's effectively happening is that other smaller groups or other possibly even larger groups are taking parts of NIM and developing them and working on them and either keeping them current or improving them. And those are the types of things that you're actively looking for to add to Meros so that Meros is as strong as possible. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, I've got another question. Sorry to go off on a NIM tangent there, but back to Meros. It's another one that I didn't understand, but that looked pretty interesting. What is Ulimit? Could you just explain that one to me? I saw it in the GitHub.
So Ulimit is a program on Linux devices, Linux being what most servers run. And there are a few other things that use it, like Macs and I believe BSD systems. And it basically says that if an app opens 1,000 network connections, it's not allowed to open anymore. It limits how many resources an app can use, which is incredibly useful from an operating system standpoint. That said, when an app hits Ulimit, it does need to properly handle it, because if it doesn't handle it properly, there's risks. So basically, we wrote code for Linux, BSD, Mac, and Windows. It's actually untested on some of those platforms, but it should work on all. And Mac, BSD use one system, Linux uses another, and then Windows uses yet another. So we actually had to write 3 different implementations of this code. And Windows doesn't use Ulimit, to be clear, but it has its own sort of alternative to it. And we basically say, how many network connections do we have? How many files do we have open? And it checks if it's approaching the limit. And if it is approaching the limit, when a new network connection, when someone connects to the Meros server, we can say, hey, sorry, we can't handle you right now. We're a bit busy. Here's some other people you can try to connecting to. So it basically just sends a list of peers for it to try connecting to. And that means that even if nodes get busy, the network can still function. We also do keep a buffer. So this code should never actually, or Meros should never actually trigger Ulimit. If the limit is, say, 100 network connections, when we get to 90, we'll say, start telling people we're busy. So that way up to 10 people can try to connect at the same time. And we'll be able to say busy, 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 busy without worrying that one of them will one of them won't work. So it's really just making sure that Meros can run over time and not trigger security measures in the operating system itself.
Okay, awesome. And you said that the Ulimit on different operating systems is actually different. They have different values. What are those values, and how much do they affect it? Like, for example, is the value especially low or too low to the point where you worry that it will affect Meros's ability to operate on a particular operating system?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
So Windows, to be clear, doesn't have Ulimit. It has its own thing because it's very different from Mac, Linux, and BSD. And it actually has a hard-coded limit of 512. And it's not actually network connections. They have a limit of 512, what's called file handles. File handles are complicated, and I don't really want to get into it. But basically, on Linux, any open file or any open network connection has one file handle. So they kind of link, they're kind of both under the same category there. So on Windows, there's a hard limit of 512. And the system there, Windows, is different because it's not Ulimit. So we had to write custom code to get the Windows value. On Linux, which does have a configurable value, you can override it, to be clear. I think the default on most systems is 1024. And we just have to hook into the system and ask how many we have. On BSD and Mac, they do use limit, but they have different ways to get the data from Ulimit. So we had to write custom code to make sure that we were getting the right data properly. And Mac actually is somewhat problematic. If I recall correctly, they have a limit of just 256 network connections. And yes, that seems high. It's hundreds still, don't get me wrong. The problem there is the initial Meros itself, when it starts up, it uses about 30 of those. Because again, this isn't just about network connections, it's about any file that Meros uses that counts as one. So because of that, between the databases and the libraries we load, we already use about 30. So that means even if you have a powerful Mac server that can handle hundreds of clients, the default settings will limit you to about 220. That said, I don't really expect any Mac servers. You can always manually change the value. And even if a Mac server was that powerful and you wanted to run a Meros node, it would still handle hundreds, even if you didn't just manually raise the limit. So I truly don't see it as being a problem.
Yeah, okay. That's a brilliant answer. That's exactly what I wanted to know. So basically, on some fringe cases, it could be a bit of an issue, but Mac servers, how popular are Mac servers? I know this is not really Meros related at all, but how popular are Mac servers? I didn't even know Mac servers existed. I was under the impression that you either get Windows servers or more often Linux servers. How popular are Mac servers?
So you can't really get, I'm sure there's some that do, don't get me wrong, but if you go to a VPS company to rent a server, no, traditionally they don't offer Macs. That said, a lot of studios, like movie studios and animation studios, they use Mac for the software on it. There's a lot of design, movie, art software that's best on Mac, according to these groups. They have that opinion. And sometimes they will use high-powered Macs, which can operate as servers. Apple does sell Macintosh servers for very high-powered workloads, and sometimes they aren't used as servers. They're just used as desktop computers. They're extremely powerful. Yet sometimes they're used as remote servers to help with the workload. So instead of having to do all your work on a very powerful computer in front of you, you can send it off to a more powerful computer.
Okay, fair enough. And somebody may decide they've got some kind of some bandwidth spare on one of these machines.
Even if it's not meant to be a Mac server, you can run a Meros node on a Mac laptop, on a MacBook Air. And that, even though it's not intended to be used as a server per se, that would still be a server.
Yeah. And it would suffer from the same problems or possibly suffer from the same problems that you were speaking about earlier.
To be honest, I don't see a Mac laptop hitting 250 clients or 220 or whatever the value would be. I think it's closer to 220. But again, that's always a configurable value. So it's really not going to be an issue. And when that value is hit, it's not like the node stops working. We are very careful to make sure that the node keeps working, and anyone who tries to connect to it still gets the data they need, because we just send them off to a different node.
Yes. I guess that in its own way does stop perhaps a certain type of attack where you pick out a node and then try to send an insane amount of connections to it. If you didn't have this Ulimit handling on the node, then you could, I guess, denial of service attack the node in that way.
Exactly. And we also IP limit. So you can't have multiple connections from the same IP. And while it's easy enough to get new IPs, don't get me wrong, it's still likely to be a few bucks per IP. So of course, if you're looking for 200 IPs, that's only $600, and you can use those IPs. You only need that one set for every node you can connect to. But we do have protections here.
Yeah.
And that's an attack on any network. Don't get me wrong. It's not something that I'm criticizing Meros for. It's a consideration that every network needs to consider.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. That was actually even more interesting than I had planned. All right, I'm going to move on to my penultimate question. Just being aware of time, as I usually am not. Number 153. I believe it's a commit. I don't know if you are the right person to answer this one, but it's about print rand seed on failure and run tests in CI. This one was actually handled by another developer, but I'm hoping, if I'm literally just scrolling through GitHub as we speak, and it does look like you have commented. So I'm hoping you understand what's going on. Kayaba, could you tell me what this was actually about? It was merged only a few days ago. So could you tell me about this one?
So as I was talked about a bit earlier, Meros does have several tests. We have NIM tests, which test segments of the Meros node, and we have Python tests, which test the entire node. Not just parts of it, but it will spin up an actual node and pretend to be another and simulate a network. So one of the things with the NIM test, the ones that test specific parts, isolated segments, is we do what's called a fuzz test. We randomly create values and we throw them at it. So in case there's any edge cases, like it may work with 1, 2, 3, but not 1, 2, 4, when both are potential. So we generate a lot of random values and try to really test every single case. And because of that, sometimes it fails. And when it fails, it can be hard to figure out why, because we don't have the random values. So the first part of this, printing the ran seed on failure, that just means that if a test does fail with random values, we print what the seed was. So that way we can test explicitly with that seed and try to figure out where it went wrong. Previously, we would notice it would go wrong, and then we would just look for another seed that worked. We would run it time and time again until we just found another seed that failed. Then there's also the fact that we now run these tests in the CI. So the CI, I actually forget what it stands for, but it's frequently used with open source projects, and it basically just automatically runs the test. Anytime anything's submitted to the Meros repository on GitHub, these tests are automatically run to make sure that the code is working as intended. So it's really just a safety feature, and it really just helps out. And I was not the primary author of this comment. Jay Romero was. I've talked about him before. He's a great developer who's been helping out. And while I did review it and I did make a couple minor edits, he's really the one that the credit for this should go to.
Okay. How much more efficient or how much of a big deal is this in terms of testing? Would you say that it knocks, I don't know, how much time do you think that this knocks off of when you're trying to get these testing done?
So because we still want to run testing locally because the tests are only when we submit it to the repo, and we don't want to submit broken code to the repo. If it's not on master, the main branch of the repo, the main code, it's not really an issue because it's not going to affect anyone who tries to download Meros, but we still want to be careful. Beyond that, when we submit it, it takes hours to run. The CI shares resources, and there's several other projects using it. And we have a very extensive test suite. So while locally it may only take half an hour to run the test, once we send it off, it's going to take 6 to 8 hours to run just because of the limited resources on the cloud because it's free. If you're doing a free service, you're not going to get the best resources. So really, it's more for extra safety than meaning that we don't have to run the test locally. We're not working on the main branch. Sure, we can just send them off. If we're just did a block of work and we did the basic test of does it compile and we just want to send them off overnight to see where they end up. Yeah, sure. But really, it's meant just to be a double check for us, an automatic one.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. I understand. Right. Okay. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you the question that I always ask, which is kind of becoming my catchphrase. When mainnet, how much more needs to be done and how much longer do you think it will take? And how happy are you with where we've got over the past month or so?
So, of course, the last month, it set us back. If I had to say how much the last month has set us back, I would say a month because I just haven't worked on the project for a bit because I'm moving. And that's extremely unfortunate, and it's not something I'm really happy about, but it is how it is. Once we do GT4S, I think we're going to do 1 or 2 testnets after that before we do the big final testnet. So if I had to guess, I would say 2-3 months. But one of the things I regret about this number is I feel like as long as 6 months ago, I've been saying 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. And the answer is you can't really put a month count on this thing. The answer's always been when it's ready. I'm not going to launch something which has real value if it's not secure, if it's not safe, if it doesn't have the features it needs to succeed. Because it's not about launching something to make money or get famous. It's about launching something that's quality to improve the space. So the answer is always going to be when it's ready.
Awesome. I love that answer. I do love that answer. When you say the test, actually, I'm clenching my fist now. It's like, yes, the testnet. When you say the testnet, do you mean a testnet that will kind of always run parallel to the mainnet? When you run these sorts of testnets, do you believe in having a testnet that kind of lives in parallel to mainnet? Obviously, doesn't have the value attached to the tokens because people can't buy them and sell them. They're not as scarce or distributed in the same way. But do you plan on having one testnet for Meros where you try things out that stays alive for the duration of the project?
So when I talk about the testnet, I actually talk about the testnet that's going to take 3 to 4 weeks. I really want to run an extended testnet before we launch the project to really make sure the bugs are ironed out. I want to make it as close to mainnet as possible and just make sure that if we launch the mainnet 2 weeks in, we're not going to have a problem. So that's the testnet I'm referring to. But yes, after we launch the mainnet, we are going to spin up a testnet in parallel. And I want to note something about buying and selling tokens. You can do that on any network which is a network, any network that has the same cryptographic guarantees. And unless the testnet has those guarantees, it's not going to be a viable testnet. The thing about testnets is generally either A, distribution is controlled, so you can really make sure that the right people get them, or if distribution isn't controlled, B, it resets frequently. And these resets mean that anyone who bought or sold tokens or was hoarding tokens, their balance is going to get wiped out. I'm not a fan of the second just because of the fact when you reset the network, you lose data and you lose complex states. When the network goes on, it builds entropy as more and more operations are performed. And when you reset the network, you lose all that entropy. So really with the test network, I plan on spawning it. We could continue the last testnet we do before mainnet, or we may reset it when mainnet happens. That isn't really something I've decided, but it will be much less decentralized just because there's going to be fewer people mining it. And with fewer people mining it, there's going to be fewer people voting. And that means fewer people are getting the token. So it's really getting Meros. So it's test Meros. So it's really important just to make sure that the right people are getting test Meros and that they are able to distribute it, whether it be through faucets, Discord, Twitter, however.
And will the purpose of that testnet be for you to test out new features before you implement them into the mainnet? For example, the MIP, I'm going to say 0001. If that's not included within Meros on its mainnet launch, would you use the testnet to test out that functionality before you move it over to mainnet, or would you perhaps spin up another testnet just for that functionality? How are you thinking about going about that this far away from it?
So if MIP 0001 is included in the network, it will be there at launch, to be clear. But we actually have three different definitions of network. We have the mainnet, obviously. We have the testnet. And we have something called the devnet. So the devnet is used for testing purposes. Instead of a 10-minute block time, it has a 1-minute block time. And it's just meant to be faster. It has a lower difficulty. It's meant to be run locally for experimental features. So I'm working on a feature on my local computer. I'll spin up a devnet. The test will use the devnet. I'll try to verify it that way. And I could even spin up a developer network with other developers, just get a few people together and really work on it. That said, this is not something meant to be long running. This is meant to be reset whenever. It's not meant to be coordinated. I'm running a devnet to test this feature. If anyone wants to join in, they're welcome to join in. But once we prove features are stable on the devnet and we're happy with them, yes, then we would hard fork the testnet. And as long as the testnet remains stable, then we would hard fork the mainnet.
Perfect. Got you. So devnet, testnet, mainnet, then we win. Kayaba, I'm going to have to wrap it up there as we've, I believe, just gone over our allotted 30 minutes. It's been absolutely fascinating. Considering I started the podcast with the Is Meros Dead, we've really gotten through some fascinating content. So thank you so much for devoting your time, not only to the project, but more importantly, from my selfish point of view, to the podcast. It's always a pleasure. Before we go, is there anything else you would like to say about Meros, or anything else you'd like to say?
I just wanted to say thank you. I've always really enjoyed doing these podcasts. I feel they're great for the community, and I really like this one. So thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Right, Kayaba, thank you so much. For all the people listening, please like, subscribe, all that other good stuff. Please join Discord. Let us know how you found the podcast. If there were some things that you didn't understand, just go ahead and ask. If there were things that you would like us to ask, or you'd like me to ask Kayaba in the future, within reason, I try not to ask him anything political because I generally don't like the answer. I would urge you to put the questions into the Discord as well, or you can find Meros on Twitter, I believe, at Meros Cryptocurrency, I'm going to say. Is that correct, Kayaba?
Sorry?
Is your Twitter handle at Meros Crypto?
Yes, it's Meros Crypto.
Yeah, at Meros Crypto, so you can follow on Twitter as well. So any questions, just throw them our way. We'll try to answer them. We generally do. Once again, thank you, Kayaba. And this has been Cryptosi speaking on State of the Project Meros, the May edition. And thank you very much for listening.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivx.org.